There's another organization, a local organization called MassMo, that runs competitive story slams at Club Passy and the Trident Bookseller Cafe. And this is a woman I met at one of those slams. And although these are competitive, many storytellers have become friends for a long time. And after I heard Karen, I knew that she was somebody who was a great storyteller and just a wonderful person. Karen Locke Culp is the author of the We Turned Out Okay podcast. And is an author and someone who has been a MassMo Story Slam winner. And she is going to be telling her on the news story next. Please welcome Karen Locke Culp.
I'm going to do this freestyle too. But before I start, I have to say that the pinnacle of my 9-year preschool career was to be the person in the fire station who gets to put on the stuff so that the kids can see that there's a real person in there and it's not a scary monster, right? It was awesome. All right. As a freshman in college, I'm a really homesick kid. And consequently, I spend a lot of time on the move back and forth from the University of Connecticut to my home about an hour and a half north here in Ashland. And it's my mom who transports me during this freshman year, and that means that she gets to make the drive, the 3-hour round trip, pretty well every weekend or every other weekend for that whole freshman year. And boy, is she excited when I inherit the family beater car, the old Toyota Corolla that doesn't have working heat, but that doesn't matter because it has a working tape deck. That's the really important part of any car. And my visits home continue. In fact, they might even increase in frequency in my sophomore year. And some peculiar things start to happen. I start to have anxiety attacks, these really crushing anxiety attacks. As I'm walking around the University of Connecticut, my heart rate starts to go really wild, and I start to have trouble breathing, like I feel that I can't breathe. And when I go home, and this is another weird thing that happens, I start asking my parents, and for context, I'm 19 at this time, if I can sleep in their bed with them. And I'm feeling really unsafe. And I have to say, there's one little bit of this that doesn't feel quite right with my mom. I feel like my mom we have a little bit of there's almost a hesitation there. Something is off with my relationship with my mom. But I still feel safest with them, and sleeping with them in their bed feels really good to me and comfortable. And my mom mentions this to a friend at one point. She says, this is really weird. We have like this adult daughter who wants to be our bedtime companion. This is very strange. And the friend happens to have been a person who was devastatingly sexually abused as a child. And she says to my mom, get that girl to a therapist. Don't ask her any questions. Just get her the hell to a therapist. So my mom says to me, would you like to go and see a therapist? And I say, okay. And I start going home. I start taking this drive on Fridays earlier now, so I can go to my home, and then my mom, we get in the car together. We have this tense, awkward silence on the way to the therapist. And her name is Beth, and she sits me down on the first day, and she says, what are you here for? And I say, well, I'm having these anxiety attacks. And she says, okay, we'll be able to help with that. We're going to figure this out. And she says, anything else? And I say, well, I think my mom might be kind of a bitch. And she says, really? Why? Well, now it comes out. Because when I was 7 years old, we had this stupid jerk that came to visit us, and he was a distant relative, and he sexually assaulted me in our basement, and my mother was right upstairs, and she didn't see it, and she didn't hear it, and she didn't help me. And then when I tried to tell her about it later, she blew me off. She pushed me away. She didn't hear me. The therapist says, we're going to work on that too. So I get back in the car. My mom says, how is therapy? Fine. And we continue to have these sort of awkward, tense drives back and forth to the therapist every week. And I talk about my mom a lot in therapy, and I don't talk about her at all, talk with her in the car at all. And in other areas, though, I am starting to feel better. Like, for example, the therapist helped me realize that each anxiety attack is a physiological reliving of the initial sexual assault. And as soon as I realize that, it's like a switch flips, and suddenly I don't have them anymore. It's like I know what they're for. I don't have to worry about them anymore. And I stopped, as time goes on, I stopped asking to sleep in my parents' bed. I realized that my mom isn't actually a bitch. She just didn't know. She really just genuinely didn't realize when I tried to tell her she didn't hear. One thing my therapist cannot talk me out of, however, and that is the idea that this was my fault. I somehow know that when I was 7, this thing that happened to me, I brought upon myself, and she can't talk me out of it. But in all other ways, I kind of walk myself back from the cliffs of insanity, and time goes on, and when I become a senior, I'm really finding that I'm very settled in my life. I'm happy. I don't need to go home and, have the security blanket of my folks all the time anymore. And my mom and I don't realize it yet, but she's got one more journey that she needs to make. And it happens in autumn of my senior year. I have had an incredible night, and I go home and I'm like, I gotta tell my mom about this. And I pick up the phone and I say, Mom, I've just had the coolest thing. I've been to the coolest thing. It's called a Take Back the Night March. And it's where a whole bunch of people show up on campus and we walk around from place to place on the UConn campus. Everybody's got these candles. There are a whole bunch of people, and at each stop, people can get up. You're invited to get up and talk about what happened to you. And so people are getting up and they're talking about being sexually harassed and molested and raped. And it's not a scary, upsetting thing. It's a feeling of real support and just amazing support. There's no other word for it. And I say, Mom, I wasn't expecting to get up. I went because a friend asked me to go. But when I was there, I stood up, and this is what I said. I said, I was sexually assaulted at age 7, and I am now standing here in front of you realizing for the first time that it was not my fault. And if this has ever happened to you, just know that it is not your fault either. Isn't that amazing, Mom, that I could say that? I mean, I feel so empowered and so excited. And there's this kind of awkward pause, and my mom says, in a really strange voice, well, that's lovely, dear. Okay, well, goodbye now, she says, and she hangs up the phone. And I don't think about the bomb I have just lobbed into my mother's lap. And I'm happy. I mean, I'm feeling so empowered and not at fault anymore. And a minute later, the phone rings. And I have a hard time identifying who it is because there's this sort of strange, like, keening wail in the background. There's just this endless scream. And finally, I'm still hearing this scream, but underneath it or on top of it now, I can hear my father's voice, and he is saying, what did you say to your mother? She won't stop screaming. So later, there will be time for putting the puzzle pieces together. My parents share in later years that my personality changed as a 7-year-old. I'd been a carefree, happy-go-lucky kid, and at 7, I became a worried and anxious kid. And there will be time later for both of my parents to help me stand up on my own 2 feet and really be a survivor instead of a victim. But right now, the moment I want to leave you with in this story is the day following the Take Back the Night March. My mom calls into work up here in Ashland. She calls into them and she says, listen, there's been an emergency with my daughter. I've got to go to her. I can't come in today. And she makes this drive that she's made so many times in the past. And she drives down to UConn to see me, and she brings to me a whole bunch of pictures. And they're pictures of me as a 7-year-old. And she says to me, look at this girl. Look at these eyes. Look at this little braids. Look at the tiny stature of this girl. There is no way that this thing that happened to this girl was her fault. Of course it wasn't her fault. And she hugs me and she apologizes and she says, I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you. I'm so sorry I missed this. And in this moment, she's giving me just the most incredible gift. She's giving me the gift of her apology. She's given me the gift of her acknowledgement and her validation. And I am so incredibly grateful for it to this day. Thank you.
Wow.